All right, folks, welcome back to the Two Stewards Show. And we're going to conclude our mini-series on sound money and talk a little bit more about how that relates to real estate investing. So we've talked about the properties of money, the properties of sound money, and we talked about fiat money, which is like our the current standard that we have, dollars. And I think we've demonstrated that fiat money is basically unsound. Right, it leads to like the slow, continuous bleeding of wealth. It leads to a decline in the standard of living in general. And yeah, Brent, we talked about this. What would you say qualifies as the standard of living? How do we measure that?
Oh, so why are we talking about the standard of living? We got a street cleaner outside. We got your phone going off. So we've come full circle now. We've talked about the characteristics of money and how gold, for instance, in the past has exhibited like these qualities that we call sound money. Right? Mm-hmm. They have good durability, portability, divisibility, uniformity. Limited supply, so scarcity, that was a big one. And then recognizability, right? Like we can accept it. So we've kind of delved into that. And then as we look at fiat money, like you said, our current system, we have money that really is just by government decree, right? So then it doesn't necessarily exhibit all the same properties that gold or other monetary technologies have throughout the past.
Yeah.
And I think we wanted to bring up Bitcoin just as to reference it off the top of the show because that is a monetary technology that has come up in the last 15 years.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are into different cryptocurrencies and have different degrees of knowledge around Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. And I think this is a topic we want to get into in the future on different episodes. But just to touch on it now, Bitcoin is in many ways a monetary technology, just like gold or fiat would be, but it exhibits different characteristics than gold or fiat.
Yeah.
So you can kind of rate each currency or each technology based on all these characteristics. So we'll pull a screen up or pull a thing up on the screen for those of you who are watching. We just have gold, Bitcoin, and fiat compared to each other across all these different categories. So durability, portability, fungibility, and whatnot. And we go down the list, and you can see that every item's got a rating. So it's an A+, that means it's very durable. So gold falls under that category. It's very durable monetary technology. Whereas fiat money, the money that we have now, the Canadian dollars and US dollars, that's not very durable. Like we're printing coin or paper money, and we have coins, and like you can lose them and they deteriorate over time, and you constantly have to replace it. So,
and inflation.
Yeah, and inflation.
I
think that goes down to the scarcity, right?
It does, but to me, it's also the durability.
Yeah.
Like eventually, if you're holding $100, eventually that'll go down to zero or like 1 cent.
Yeah.
So to me, that's not very durable either.
No. Well, yeah, and that's the scarcity. So anyways, maybe you got to watch this podcast from now on because we got some valuable information on the screen. But we don't have to go through all of these. It's hard to get a sense for our listeners of what's actually going on. But basically, no monetary technology is perfect, right?
Yeah.
Like gold has worked really well in the past, but it also has failings and flaws. Fiat money is working for the last 50 years. It's not working very well in a lot of different areas. So there's different items that will score highly for one currency and very poorly for another. And our job, I guess, is to analyze all the different options out there, options for monetary technology, and to make a decision to say which one will store my wealth or store the value of my time into the future the best and for the longest, like you said, most durable, but also be portable, that I can take it somewhere. Also
Yeah.
be scalable, so I can buy different things. So this chart does a good example, and maybe we'll link it in the show notes too, so people can take a quick look. But
Yeah. I mean, I think the point is when you have wealth, or even if you don't, like, you have to steward it wisely. That's the whole point of our podcast, right? How are you stewarding what you have? So you have to kind of evaluate the current system, and then what do you do with that? Like, how do you, if we know that fiat money is unsound, then probably, I don't know, maybe, can we get out of that system? Right now, we can't exit the system, right? There's a few options. There's gold.
you could be a hermit.
Yeah,
Right?
you could. But again, that's not really stewarding. It's not stewardly.
No.
Right? The point of wealth, the point of having money, having wealth, is not just for you. And we've talked about, our consumeristic society, our very inward-facing society. And when you do things, it's for you, right?
Yeah.
And, like, that's not biblical, right? We have gifts. God gives us gifts, and he expects us to, some of those return right back to him. Some of it goes to other people, right? There's clear biblical mandates to support the widow, support the orphan, support the poor. And that it doesn't say pay your taxes so that the government can do those things. It says, like, you do them, right? And obviously we have a different framework than maybe we had in the time of Jesus or even in the Old Testament. But the principles still apply. So to your point about being a hermit, like, that's not a good response, right? People will say, I'm just not going to participate in this system, right?
Yeah.
As a Christian response to the corruption of money and, like, a lot of things that we've talked about. But I don't think that's a particularly stewardly approach either. We have to work with what we have. Give unto Caesar what is Caesar's. So don't ignore the system. You're in it. You have to use it. And you still have to meet your obligations towards other people, towards your family, and just towards being responsible in general.
Yeah.
Right?
What
With
does
money.
that look like?
Yeah.
Well, you asked me about standard of living, and so far
Yeah.
we haven't touched on that at all. Sorry about that. Well, I was trying to get to that.
And then I jumped in.
I jumped in too. So, because basically, if you have unsound money, which is what we do have, you end up with a decline in standard of living. And we wanted to just kind of speak briefly about what standard of living is and explain kind of what has happened over the course of history too, just to give perspective on what the current standard of living is and what we can expect moving forward. So I guess, like, standard of living you can look at it in economic terms, right?
Yep.
Like how much GDP or
Oh, not GDP.
GDP, what is that?
Terrible measure.
Like gross domestic product.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's an important one.
So I don't like GDP as a measure of anything really, because it includes government spending.
Yeah, so it's
And
kind
it
of
can
skewed.
be, well, what we're doing with immigration is we're raising GDP, but we're not raising like an
actual
efficiency
production.
measure. We're just raising the actual, if there's more people in the country, your GDP will be higher.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean it's better for anybody. That doesn't mean the standard of living has gone up. The amount has just gone up.
Right. So we don't like that metric.
I
But,
don't. I mean, you can if you want.
I don't really. Now that you say that, I'm like, I got to look at this again.
Well, because the government will trumpet like, we've raised GDP.
Right.
It's like, you've just raised the total amount of money
Yeah.
sloshing around. It's
Right.
not any better for anybody,
Yeah.
and it's actually worse
Yeah.
in terms of standard of living.
Okay, so we've knocked that one off. Standard of living is declining even when it comes to GDP. Even if GDP is going up, standard of living still goes down. I guess another thing is to, like, we were talking about a little bit earlier, but like, so personal satisfaction, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to talk about that a bit more, but
No, I don't believe in it.
no. You were just saying. Well, you got to go on 2 vacations a year.
Yeah.
You got to have a nice car that doesn't break down.
You can make an argument for a car that doesn't break down. Does it have to be nice?
Yeah.
I don't know. But no, like yeah, personal satisfaction is often part of how we define standard of living.
Yeah.
And I don't think it really needs to be or should be because it's not always how
Well,
we
I guess
have.
you could put into that like health, right?
Yeah.
So like level of education, like how have you got to where you are? Like, yeah, are you? Yeah, you might be. You might have lots of food for your family, but your back might be pretty sore, right? And that kind of is a direct impact on your standard of living moving forward. Like you might be in a good spot now, but your health might be shot because you had to work hard.
Yeah, although I mean we have better access to healthcare now, right? And if like we talked about this
Now
as
compared
well,
to what?
compared to any time in history.
So I was gonna say because like 5 years ago, I feel like it would probably have better access than now. But
Yeah, and so that's maybe an interesting correlation to fiat money and the decline of our standard of living. So when you look, like if you zoom out over history, over thousands of years, right, we have it better than we have ever had. Like everybody on the planet in general has a much, much higher standard of living, right? The number of people living in abject poverty, less than $2 a day, has decreased
so that's
greatly.
what abject poverty is.
Don't quote me on it, but I think it's around $2 a day is like, you know, abject,
$2 in today's dollars or $2.
Yeah, two fiat dollars.
Two fiat dollars.
No, and then like it goes up from there. Then you go up to like $50 a day or $10 a day, which to us is still poor, but it's above subsistence.
Yeah,
in a lot of countries, but
which is making what you need to live, right? Just
yeah.
Like you go out, you work in the field, you get what you need to live, and then
so basically, so you're not starving.
Yeah,
right, and that's the base.
So people, you're saying people
like
whatever, I don't know how many 100 years ago, but everybody used to be in this case.
Yeah, I mean,
or the vast majority of the population on the globe was in more or less
in abject poverty. And so they were either starving or barely at subsistence.
Right.
And if you compare the population as a percentage now to then, it's completely different, right?
Yeah.
The standard of living overall has increased dramatically. And even if we if you look at how kings and queens lived, right? You talked about the Tower of London.
Yeah.
Right, what that was like.
Well, I was able to visit that, and that to me was like, okay, this is a historical building in London, England, and it's like, you know, kings and queens lived here or whatever, nobility, and you walk through and see all, like, it's a museum, right? They have all the jewels and like armor from that time period, but it's like these are the best luxuries that they had for the royalty in Europe, whatever, and then like you go to their bedroom and it's just like a stone room with a little fireplace in the corner, and like this is where they would have slept. And it's like, what? No glass in the window, like no air circulation, no nothing, right? And it's like, wow. Talk about standard of living back then versus now. But
like we went to Versailles, and it's very ornate and lush and stuff, but still there was no running water. You just think of hygiene and sanitation and healthcare and all that stuff. So we even compared to royalty back then, most people on the planet have better access and just have a better standard of living in those terms.
Yeah.
Right. And so we can see that as a result of the Industrial Revolution and technology. So
how did that come about exactly? Right. Like, if you're living in a stone castle and like no running water and no bathrooms and no glass in your windows and no heat or whatever, to now, like, let's frame this in the monetary conversation. Tie it back to money here.
I mean, I think technology is probably the bigger defining thing. Technology and trade, right?
But what allows technology to advance? And I think that's where money comes in, right? Because the formulation of capital, and that's like, maybe we'll go ahead and let you talk about technology and trade first.
No, you're right. It's tied together, right? You can have all that, but in order to have trade
that's
useful, you need to have an agreed upon
standard
of money, and gold was that for quite a while, right?
Yeah.
And then eventually,
And so to the extent that the monetary standard is stable and reliable and predictable and holds its value, so to that extent you can build your trade on. It's like building your house on a foundation of, sand, right?
Yeah.
If you build your whole ecosystem and your economic system off of, some monetary standard that's going to just inflate away, all the institutions that you are working to build are eventually just going to lose their foundation and fall out from underneath you.
Yeah.
Ooh, that's deep.
As deep as a basement. And we've talked about time preference in the past, right? Lowering your time preference. So you can't really think far ahead if you're focused on subsistence.
Right.
Right? Because you're just worried about your next meal.
Yeah.
And so you can't really make your life a lot better because you just don't have the luxury of having the time to do that. If all your time is focused on subsistence, on just getting food for today, right? And then if your standard of living goes up, maybe you can focus on a week from now, or maybe you can focus on, and like we see this in a lot of countries where they're able now to, with a little bit of help, maybe send their kids to school so they can buy books and clothing for their children so that they can attend school. And that's like very long-term thinking now, because this is, the kid's going to have 8 or 12 years.
Why are you not in the field making food?
Exactly, right? You have kids so that they can help you find food and feed the family. But if you're going to send one to school, then, long-term thinking, right?
Yeah, eventually this will pay back and the kid will have enough knowledge to be able to come back and, massively improve our methods of doing things or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. So as your time preference gets, I always get it backwards.
Lower.
Gets lower.
Higher is I want it now.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
High time preference. I want things now. Urgent.
Yeah. So less urgency.
At least I
generally will, barring other, bad lifestyle choices, will lead to better economic situation for people.
Yeah.
And then that has that snowball effect, right? And then as we can specialize, and people, we talked about this with the mill and with stuff, right? As people are able to specialize, that improves everybody's standard of living, and then leads to further specialization if you can have stable trade, where all that specialization, which, we've seen to some extent, right? Where China became the de facto manufacturer because they specialized in making goods cheaply.
Yeah.
And, whole other topic, I guess, right? Was that a good idea? No, because now we're seeing more nationalism and people bring manufacturing back in-house. But that's just one example of how, in general, if you have a decent system, you can improve everybody's standard of living.
Okay, so that ties into something else we wanted to talk about, which is zero sum.
Yeah.
Because standard of living is kind of just, we just want to touch on that because we always talk about the decline in standard of living, right?
Yeah.
If stuff is inflating away or your money doesn't go as far, I guess that's another way to say it, right? Like if you have money in the bank and you can't buy something because the price has gone up due to inflation, that decreases your standard of living. So, so we've covered that. Zero sum. I just have that on my notes.
Yes.
That always, like, it's hard for me to understand when I read it. I see, like, this is a zero sum whatever, and I'm like, what does that mean? Like, it's hard for me to wrap my head around until I think about it, and then I'm like, okay, because maybe I'll let you.
Well, it's like a mathematical problem where when you work it out, it always ends
zero.
up back at zero.
Net
so
zero.
all the sum of all the parts is kind of zero. So if you're talking about like the economic pie,
is it
there's this idea that
blueberry pie or economic pie? I guess.
I mean,
that wouldn't be very tasty.
I don't mind blueberry pie is not bad.
Yeah, but
But the idea is that there is this
So you're saying
pie.
there's an economic pie with no ice cream on it?
Yes.
Okay.
It's not yet.
Okay, not yet.
We can.
Oh, we're
as
talking
we-
about that.
Yeah, as we specialize, we can add ice cream.
Okay.
Get the dairy farmer in.
Hey, this is a good. We should start a
Now I'm
podcast.
hungry. But yeah, so the
You're always
pie,
angry.
if we can talk about this, is
Yes.
a certain size. And that, so if somebody has a bigger slice of that pie, and I'm just talking about, in terms of dollars,
Yeah.
that means they must be taking some of that from somebody else,
Right.
right? There's only X amount of dollars to go around, or X amount of wealth, however you want to frame it, so that if somebody is a millionaire, that means they are treading on poor people directly because they've taken either that money directly from them or the opportunities from those people
Yeah.
to
Okay. Because that
improve
seems
their,
pretty logical, right? It's like, well, because you and I have talked about like how much money is out there, right? Like we talked
Yeah.
about the supply of money. So
Yep.
if you take this logically, it's like, okay, the government puts out so much money, and that's how much money there is, right?
Yep.
So if you have 1 million and I have like 10, which could be true,
Yep.
right? Yeah. So then, like, yeah, you have money that maybe I should have or whatever. There is no more money to get because there is only so much.
Yeah.
So how would you?
Yeah. So
counter
like
that?
basically,
is that
it's a
true?
fallacy. It's not true at all.
Okay. So why is that not true?
So when you look at societies as they grow and engage in trade, because trade is the primary creator of wealth, everybody gets wealthier. And you just have to look at the world today versus what we're talking about, standard of living, right? How almost everybody in the world has a better standard of living now than people did 100 years ago or 500 years ago in terms of, healthcare, life expectancy, even just the dollars in their pockets. Like the pie has grown.
Right. And
The pie is not the same size as it was 100 years ago, which you would expect that's all it would be. And you would still have kings and queens, so like 0.0001% of the population with good access to money
yeah.
and the benefits of society, but it's not true.
Yeah.
And even for the people who are poor, their standard of living has gone up. So the pie has increased. So we can increase wealth in general
Yeah.
through trade and through sound money practices. So what that means is, we often talk about the redistribution of wealth, or
Yeah.
especially socialists will talk about that, right? All these billionaires, like it used to be millionaires, now they're really hitting the billionaires, and
Yeah.
soon it'll be the trillionaires, right? But
Yeah.
we have to redistribute the wealth from them to the poor people because morally it's wrong that they have that much money because
Yeah.
they must have taken it from these people. And that's the idea that that's the zero-sum game, that there's only so much money, it can never grow. And we're like,
Right.
no, that mathematical equation is wrong because the actual answer continues to grow and grow and grow and get bigger, and there is more for everyone.
Yeah. So I guess maybe an illustration to tie this in together with time preferences. In Saifedean's book, The Bitcoin Standard, he talks about time preference a little bit. He talks about two guys that go out fishing,
Mm-hmm.
and the one guy, I think it's his book anyways, the one guy, spends his whole day fishing with his hands. He's trying to catch a fish, and he gets enough to eat, and the other guy does the same thing. But eventually the one guy says, hey, I'm gonna spend 6 hours out of my 8 hours fishing with my hands. I'm gonna spend 2 hours building a fishing rod,
Mm-hmm.
or doing something that does not relate to immediate consumption, but will produce something that I can use to improve my chances of getting a fish. So
he's taking a risk there.
So he's
with
taking
his
a
time.
risk. He's reducing his time preference.
And his time, really his capital is time
Yeah.
and like labor.
Yeah. So all he's got is his time. He's just working. He's trying to get a fish. And so after maybe 2 weeks, he's built this fishing rod, right? And maybe he doesn't have as much to eat. Maybe he's a little bit hungry because he's made that risk and he's kind of sacrificed for those 2 weeks
Mm-hmm.
to get, 80% of the fish that he would have got. But now he has a fishing rod. So now he can spend half as much time fishing and get the same amount of fish, right? So now what does he do with the rest of his time? Well, he builds a boat. So now, after maybe a year, he's got a boat and a fishing rod, and he can go out into places where that other guy can't even go. Like, the other guy's still fishing with his hands, right? And he's just like, what are you wasting your time making this thing? Like, why are you wasting your time? We got to turn the cameras back on. Why are you wasting your time building a boat or building a fishing rod when that actually doesn't produce anything for you, right? And but little does he know, the other guy's going out in his boat with his fishing rod all across the lake and catching fish that the other guy's never even seen, right? And those fish might even have more nutritional value. He might be able to fish for 1 day and catch enough fish he needs for a month or a year. So that Mark's running around trying to get the camera set up. But yeah, so that basically kind of ties these all together, because we have time preference, which that's an exhibit. That's an example of low time preference, right? You're sacrificing your current, satisfying your current needs in the present for satisfying them better in the future. It's also like an exercise in building capital goods, like goods that you can't consume that you can use to produce goods that you can consume. And it's an example of what we were just talking about, zero sum and standard of living, because if you have a pie that's a certain size and there's only so many fish out there, well, now all of a sudden you got a fishing rod and no, there's actually more fish. And then you've got a boat and there's actually fish that I've never even seen before.
Yeah.
Right. And so you're actually, through what you called economic production and trade and, building capital goods, basically you're finding and discovering new things that you never knew existed. And that's, I think, a lot of what technological development is, right? Is, we have an iPhone now, and on the iPhone, there's a lot of apps that maybe like a compass. We would have had a compass before, but now it's digital. But there's also a ton of different things that we never would have even dreamed of, right? And if somebody didn't spend their time not finding food and eating it and building the iPhone, where would we be?
Well, and that's capitalism, right?
Yeah.
So capitalism is not the system we have now, because the government has their fingers in it, way too far. But that's the idea, that you build up capital and then you risk that capital, and it starts smaller, gets bigger and bigger. So the guy who he's got access to different fish.
Yeah. So maybe he sells them to the other guy.
Yeah. So in this case, he's doing all this stuff, and maybe getting wealthier, or at least improving his standard of living.
Because now he can go out one day and sit on the beach for the rest of the year.
Yeah. But the other guy, he hasn't taken anything away from that guy.
No, he's still got.
He's done nothing wrong to him, but the economic pie has improved. So now he can either get other fish, or he can spend some time maybe growing some corn or wheat, right? And diversify their food sources so he can be healthier, live longer. He can start a family.
Yeah, maybe one of his kids becomes a boat builder and sells boats to the
Exactly. And he can trade with other villages, because now instead of having the same fish that everybody has access to along the shore that you can catch with your hands, he's got some deep sea fish, or maybe he's got wheat, or he's got other things that he can now trade, and that leads for other people to be able to specialize. And all of that is done at no harm to the first guy who's just catching fish with his hands still.
Yeah.
And comparatively, he is more poor than the other people. Yeah. But that's through no wrongdoing of the people who are doing these other things, who have taken the time to risk that. So in fact, his life will probably be better, because he's going to see maybe he can still trade some of those fish for some grain or some berries or whatever, right?
Yeah. So you're not really negatively impacting him in any way. You're actually producing opportunities for him and potential that he never would have had on his own. Yeah, that sounds like a world I want to live in.
Well, that, to some extent, that is the world we live in, right?
Yeah.
We have all these opportunities to do.
We've come a long way since building fishing rods and boats and
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, we have all these opportunities to do things that, that I never would have thought of myself.
Yeah.
But somebody else is like, hey, here's a way you can make money. It's like, oh, yeah, that's pretty cool. Or like real estate, right?
Yeah.
What we're talking about, I don't have any sort of original thoughts around real estate generally.
Yeah.
I've learned things from other people who have already done it.
Nothing new under the sun here, Mark.
Yeah, well, once in a while you get someone who comes up with something brand new, and it's like, whoa, that's really cool.
Yeah.
But in general, there's just so many opportunities that you just need to pick something and put your nose to the grindstone and
do it.
And you have the opportunity to succeed.
Yeah.
And be a good steward, really. Right? Well, no, that is kind of the whole point.
Yeah.
So we've talked about, our money system being unsound, some alternatives, right? We've got gold, which has been a fairly popular one over the years, and there's a lot of gold bugs out there. And then we've touched on Bitcoin, which, we'll get into that later. But what do you do right here and now? And, this is a real estate podcast. We're in real estate.
Yeah.
And real estate is one way that we have found to really use the system that we have and be able to steward your wealth, our wealth wisely through investments in real estate. So without doing anything, anything super shocking, we can work within the context of the current system to,
So real estate is a powerful tool. I still see there's so much potential out there in all these different ways, right? We have to acknowledge that there's all kinds of different investments, and in particular business. Like if you start your own business and invest your money and your time in a business, the reward can be very great, right?
Yeah.
Where real estate really comes in is when you don't have the time to just, quit your job and start a business, or, maybe you're not entrepreneurial by nature.
Yeah.
Or you're a little bit more risk averse, and that's where real estate starts to make more and more sense, right? Mm-hmm. And part of the reason it makes sense is because, like you said, you're using the system to work for you, but the incentives, what am I trying to say? The incentives behind the system is to take on debt, right? And we talked about that. And real estate is this perfect kind of option to be able to get good debt and own a scarce asset, right? Because if you have unsound money, which is what we do have, the biggest problem with fiat system, especially if you saw this chart earlier, was the scarcity of it, right? So it's got an F over here for scarcity, and this is just somebody made this up, but basically saying we don't have any scarcity when it comes to the money that we save in. So people are looking for scarce things they can hold on to. Mm-hmm. So that's a prudent response, right? It's I work so hard, I make all this money, and I put it in fiat dollars, and it just evaporates because the money supply goes up. So I'm trying to find scarce alternatives, and real estate is one of them, right? They just don't make more of it. So once you hold it, you're okay, I value this, holding this more than my fiat dollars.
Yeah.
I don't know where I was going with that.
No, but that is the point, right? That's sort of one of the ways to either get out of the system or to at least limit our exposure to the current system that we have. So don't keep your wealth in dollars because they're going to evaporate. Put it in a scarce asset like real estate.
Yeah.
And again, we can talk about some of the alternatives, gold and Bitcoin as well. But, even if you are in some of those alternatives, you're not going to put 100% of your wealth in there, right? That's probably not super prudent either. And it depends on the stage of life that you're at, right? You don't want to be 100% in real estate either, but if you're young and getting started in real estate, like most of your wealth is going to be concentrated in real estate. That's just how it is, right?
Yeah.
You're taking a bit of a risk there, but I think we've demonstrated that real estate is a prudent enough investment that like it's safe if you're prudent and invest wisely. It is a safe investment. You got something on your tip of your tongue there.
I don't know about that. I have I'm looking through this book, the Fiat Standard, and I don't know what I'm talking about, to be honest. Sorry. I had something here.
Okay. Well, I mean, there is I have heard the argument that like the government could expropriate your property, right? Which is, yeah, I guess that's a valid argument, right? We're living in the West. It's not as much of a threat, I suppose, but you could see something in the foreseeable future where that could happen. So all of your wealth is just like, it's gone. And this has happened in third world, sort of second or developing countries as well, where the government has expropriated land. Here, generally, you would get a financial reward for it. But yeah, in some countries, no, they'll just take it and that's it, right?
Yeah. Okay. So I had this a comment right now in this book. Success in fiat means accumulating larger negative cash balances, and people live their entire lives stacking debt obligations upon themselves. So he's making the argument that in order to be successful under this current fiat regime
Yep.
that we live under, you need to accumulate larger negative cash balances. That doesn't make sense, does it? Or it does make sense, but it shouldn't be the way it is.
It shouldn't.
To talk about zero sum.
Yeah. Well, so we've talked about this before, right? When I get a mortgage, it's a negative cash balance, but what that does is dilutes your savings. Right. And anytime I create new money through mortgages specifically, because we're talking about real estate, if you have money saved up, I get that mortgage that increases the money supply and it dilutes the value of your savings.
Yeah.
Right. And this is going to happen, whether you like it or not, through
because he's
lending.
saying that that's the incentive of the system, right? Like
it is.
Yeah. You want to stack debt obligations upon yourself. Like you spend your entire life trying to get good debt, basically. Good debt,
not credit card debt,
not bad,
for things that depreciate.
But like you're rewarded by getting debt, kind of thing.
Absolutely.
Like that doesn't make sense.
Yeah,
or it does make sense.
It doesn't, but that is the system we're in, right?
Yeah.
And we have to protect ourselves against, the dilution of our savings, right? Through, so new creation of mortgages aside, right? The other way that government does it is through deficit spending.
Right.
And like we know that's going to continue to happen, right? There's no chance that it will not, that will stop.
Yeah. So they spend more than they make, and they only make money through taxes.
Yeah, and that's part of modern monetary theory is like that's fine as long as inflation doesn't get out of hand, which we kind of see how that hasn't worked out too well. But deficit spending is fine because
theory,
that's how's that working out? But deficit spending is just a necessary part of growing GDP, and this is why I have such a issue with the measure of GDP and stuff, right? But that's just how our economy works, and it's fine.
Maybe we'll
as
have
long
to
as
get
we
into
can do
that
it
next time. Talk
in
about
perpetuity,
GDP a bit more.
So gross domestic product, which is the measure of all the economic activity generally in a country. So maybe we should have said that before, but it is what it is. So you can either ignore that that governments will continue to deficit spend, increase the money supply, and dilute the value of your dollars.
Well, and the penalty for ignoring that is basically the value of your wealth just disappears or evaporates over time, right?
Exactly.
And the rate at which it evaporates or you said dilutes, like increases. Yeah. So you lose more and more quickly, right?
Yeah. So compound interest
Yeah. Not to
right,
be all doom and gloom, but
no, but I think somebody called compound interest the eighth wonder of the world, right? When you look at it, yeah, because it totally is. If you're earning 10% on something, you earn 10% the first year, but then the next year you're earning 10% on the original amount you had plus that extra 10%.
yeah.
And use the rule of 72. I don't know if you've heard of that,
Yeah.
but if you divide your interest rate into 72, that tells you how long it'll take for that amount to double.
Right.
Right. So,
like what you put in.
yeah, your original capital. So when you look at it, it's like, wow, the higher the interest, the quicker it will double, which is super cool. But that also goes the other way with inflation, because inflation isn't just is not static, right? If inflation is at 5% a year, that also compounds negatively.
Yeah.
So if you have money in the bank, you're actually, losing that value at a compounded rate. So
down to zero.
yeah. And to me, that's not very prudent.
Well, it's also not a bad thing if you own debt, because then the value of your debt.
Exactly.
Are we explaining this properly?
No,
Well, are we explaining it in a way that people understand, like how cool this is?
I don't know. That's their problem. We're just talking. No, but you're right.
If you're listening out there.
And that's how screwed up the system is.
Yeah.
That's why he's right that you want to accumulate more debt, because your obligation actually decreases over time, because it's denominated
rate.
at an increasing rate, because it's denominated in dollars.
So how can you get good debt, Mark?
You buy real estate, and that's
All right.
That's the whole point.
Should we leave it there and wrap this
No,
up?
I just want to hammer that point a little bit more, that I think you're obligated to understand the system that we're in. And once you understand it, then you have to act based on that. And what is prudent, what is risky,
becomes a different conversation.
Yeah, once you understand how our system works, I think it is not prudent, and it is risky to simply let your savings sit there. And you need to have some savings, obviously, for your rainy day fund.
Yeah.
But beyond that, it's imprudent actually to just let it sit there.
Yeah.
And whether it's a GIC or something like that, right? Real estate is a very prudent use of your funds.
Yeah.
And to me, biblically, you look at the parable of the talents, right? And the master giving these out, and the one guy just buries it because he's very risk averse and worried about losing it, and the other guys do stuff with it. That's that kind of speaks to me. We need to be prudent, and we need to be, what we talked about, right? Good stewards with our money. So sitting on it's not good. And real estate, as I think we've demonstrated, is probably the best way for regular people to make good investments, and to
especially as hands off. It's not a full-time job, right? In it. No, there are a lot of benefits, and it's eye-opening when you start talking about this stuff and delving into kind of the history of money, and like we've done in this mini series now, just talking about what makes for sound money and what makes for money that will dilute over time, and how we can combat that. It's definitely eye-opening. I think people are going to be scratching their heads going how do we get here?
And keep in mind, we're talking about one level of life, sort of, right? The physical level where we need to provide for things. Obviously, it has nothing to say about the spiritual level of life, because our treasure isn't here. Our treasure is in heaven.
Yeah.
But we got to use the time and the resources that we have now wisely. And that's, talk to your minister about the other side of it, I guess. We're not dealing with that so much. Although there is a tie-in, right? If you are, and we've seen that wealthy folks, that we know in our churches are able to help out others, and that is, spiritual giving includes financial giving. So I can leave it at that, I think.
Yeah, good. All right.
Yeah.
Well, we'll see you guys next time. Hopefully we'll have a new topic that you all are really keen on listening to. But thanks for listening to this little mini series on the properties of sound money. Hopefully you gleaned something from it. And until next time,
steward your wealth wisely.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Two Stewards Show. If you like my voice better, click subscribe.
And if you like my voice better, click share.
If you like both, give us a 5-star rating.
To interact with the show, feel free to reach out at hello@twostewards.ca.
We'll see you in the next episode. In the meantime, steward your wealth wisely.